Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, March 4th, 2019. No news today. Just thought we'd pop in and say hello. In fact, fair to middling day to you, everyone. No news to report, apparently. Nothing happened over the weekend. Nobody made any crazy speeches, and nobody is finding out, as they always believed was true, that Fox News is a propaganda network dedicated to the elevation of Donald Trump and Donald Trump-like policies. And everything you ever thought was true is true, and everything that Donald Trump ever accused anyone else of is true of him. So we're done. Now, is there anything else you'd like to discuss? Perhaps you're crocheting something quite nice and want to share details about it. Maybe you've invented a new way to spread peanut butter and jelly on bread and put it together into a delicious and tasty treat. Let us know, because we're at a loss today. I don't know what we'll be talking about. We could take one of two approaches. One, of course, would be for us to simply read Jane Mayer's article that is all the rage this morning. The other would be to read all the tweets about Jane Mayer's article, because there's no way we'll get through the article itself. I mean, it looks to be about 400 pages long anyway. And you know how we get off track on things, although it might make for an interesting discussion. I haven't finished reading all the tweets about what's in Jane Mayer's article in order to really figure out whether we can make a full show out of it or not. But it always looks like it, and usually her articles are worth 6 or 7 shows as it is. Anyway, this one appears to be no exception. And the pattern repeats itself. We will learn all of these things, all of these terrible things about what's going on inside the administration, get furious, elect Democrats, and then refuse to look backward and straighten any of this stuff out, because it will be time at that point for all of us to work hard on our positive policy priorities and see them filibustered to death. So get ready. It's going to be interesting. We've got lots to do. That is to say, we've got a lot of things to write down on paper as policy positions and see stymied later. And then we'll get frustrated with members of the Senate reaching out to people who used to be never Trumpers and we thought might be reasonable, who might come to a compromise and be the 60th vote for something good. But as you know, by that point, I would say probably ice cream and puppies will be death panels at that point, and socialism as well, and we have to get rid of it. So lots to catch up on, like we mentioned. You could probably have spent an entire show digesting Donald Trump's crazy speech to CPAC if you wanted to do something like that. And I kind of do, because he's kind of crazy. I, of course, didn't watch the whole thing. I don't know if anybody actually did, besides people who were professionally responsible for reporting on it. But I have a feeling that they didn't even watch the whole thing through without a break either, unless they were there live and forced to do so. Because people are still coming up with bits and pieces from that crazy speech that were unseen over the weekend by the mainstream, who were depending on the professionals to do the viewing. And he said all the dumbest things, some of which were old and some of which are new, or at least new twists on old dumb things that he said, including with the return of one of my favorite Republican tropes, the idea that if you take more birth control pills, you will be either safer or prevent extreme pregnancy, I guess is what, I don't know what the idea is. But there's an idea among Republican men anyway that refuses to die, that birth control pills are something you take every time you have sex, one way or another, whether voluntarily or not. Trump came up with this idea that he swears was told to him by a Border Patrol agent, and so therefore is true, even if he remembered it correctly, which was that the caravans of migrants coming up from Central America are dangerous. I mean, it's dangerous to be outside with a large number of people or strangers and wandering through the wilderness in a more or less lawless situation. Not really sure to which authorities you can appeal should something go terribly wrong. And there, of course, I would imagine, are credible reports of sexual abuse and rape along the way. Capitalizing on that because they care so much about stopping sexual abuse and rape, Republicans are appealing to Democrats and progressives to, I guess they're hoping that they will come out in opposition to the caravans based on a preference for rape prevention, which I don't know whether that's really going to work or not. But Trump has got it in his head because maybe some Border Patrol people have it in their heads. I don't know whether they believe it. I don't know whether they told him anything. He may have made all of it up. But it was a great story that there's so much danger of rape on the road to the U.S. southern border that mothers were giving their daughters, loading them up with, as he said, massive amounts of birth control pills. Now, someone did try to point out to me, maybe it's the Plan B pill, and you need to carry lots of them because those are things that you would take in relation to the number of sexual encounters, voluntary or otherwise, that you had. But I don't think so, and I don't know how widely available that is in Central America. I don't know how widely available birth control is, but it seems to be a persistent myth. This is not the first time, far from the first time, that Republicans have insisted that people are taking birth control pills like candy because something, and how dare you have sex even if it's being raped and something like, I don't know. They heard somewhere that Democrats were upset about people being sexually assaulted, and so therefore they'll abandon everything else in, I don't know, some mad scramble to try and prevent sexual assault. Although most people, most of the women probably fleeing their countries are fleeing the exact same conditions. So I don't know. There's really no reason to believe any of the speech, and that wasn't even necessarily the wildest aspect of it. Besides which, it's all being now wiped out by revelations from Jane Mayer. I checked on the pronunciation of her name before the show. This is the first time I've ever done anything like that. As often as I've seen the name, I was never sure whether it was like Oscar Mayer or maybe Mayer. But anyway, Greg Dworkin is here, and it's top of the list for you, I can see. What other things did you possibly find to talk about? I'll scroll down and look.
Well, let me put it this way.
Okay.
The title of the Pundit Roundup is, I don't know if they mean it, but at least they're saying it.
Okay. Yeah.
Because that's really what's going on. Yeah, we can do the Jane Mayer thing. It's funny. She's written my favorite, this is from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. She's written a 5-part trilogy here. It's really long.
Yes, they often are.
But there's a lot of good stuff in it.
It's says, amazing.
New from me, Fox News had the story of Trump's hush money payoffs to Stormy Daniels before the election, but killed it because the reporter said she was told, good reporting, kiddo, but Rupert Murdoch wants Trump to win, so set it aside. The reporter sued and is bound by an NDA, so we don't know where that is.
Oh, well.
So yeah, Fox News is in the situation where if you want to do actual straight reporting, you have to sue them in order to get it published.
Yeah, although, to be honest, it's a story similar to ones I've heard before even from New York Times reporters, not because of an NDA, but editors that wouldn't run certain stories, and then when the writers either leave or threaten to write a book instead, outside of the control of the New York Times editors, the Times says, exclusive, got a story to run.
A story that Ronan Farrow started that, we might get around to actually finishing.
Right.
Yeah, NBC did
does
that.
Happen.
So it does happen, but obviously there's a lot more and other things in that. But that's not the only story that caught my attention. The other one was a really interesting one, I thought, by Garrett Graff.
Yeah.
In the New York Times, how Giuliani might take down Trump.
Okay. By continuing to represent him, I guess.
That's one way. The other way is in his earlier life, when he actually worked for a living, he was a DA who went after the mafia. And he was of the era that put together RICO, the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. That's what RICO stands for. We all usually
Right.
the name, but just to remind people.
Not the guy who wore the diamond in the Copacabana.
It was a law designed to allow prosecutors to go after enterprises that engage in extended organized criminality, and it laid out certain predicate crimes. Those that prosecutors could use to stitch together evidence of a corrupt organization and then go after everybody involved in the organization as part of an organized conspiracy. Right? So the headline grabbers were violent crimes like murder, kidnapping, arson, and robbery. The statute also focused on crimes like fraud, obstruction of justice, money laundering, and even aiding or abetting illegal immigration.
Yes.
So examining, for example, Bedminster and some of the other Trump properties for illegal immigration could be part and parcel of making a bigger picture, or the way they put it, the sheer number and breadth of the investigations into Mr. Trump's orbit these days indicates how vulnerable the president's family business would be to just this type of prosecution. In December, Kagro, counted 17, and since then, investigators have started an inquiry into undocumented workers at Mr. Trump's New Jersey golf course, another crime that could be a RICO predicate. Mr. Cohen's public testimony itself, where he certainly laid out enough evidence and breadcrumbs for prosecutors to verify his allegations, mentions enough criminal activity to build a racketeering case. Moreover, RICO allows prosecutors to wrap 10 years of racketeering activity into a single set of charges, which is to say almost precisely the length of time, a decade, that Michael Cohen would have unparalleled insight into Mr. Trump's operation. I love that New York Times, Mr. Trump. Mr. Trump.
Yes, right.
Very, very funny Saturday Night Live cold open, by the way, if you didn't see it.
I did.
About the hearing. Very, very well done.
It was
Yeah?
Yeah, I enjoyed that one. I had to go back and see it after the fact, but...
Yeah, they're not always funny, but that one was funny.
Oh, this was a very good episode.
Many mafia cases end up being built on wiretaps, just like, for example, the perhaps 100 recordings Mr. Cohen says he made of people during his tenure working for Mr. Trump.
Lordy.
Recordings that federal investigators are surely poring over as part of the $90,000 documents and files they seized in their April raid last year, and a Mr. what is his name? Clay.
Oh, right. He wanted to know where the boxes were.
Clay Higgins
Courts,
of Fort Lee, New Jersey.
Clay Potts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He wanted to know where the boxes came from. That's what is in those boxes. And indicting the whole Trump organization as a corrupt enterprise could also help prosecutors address the thorny question of whether the president can be indicted in office. This is the interesting part. They could lay out a whole pattern of criminal activity, indict numerous players, including perhaps Trump family members, and leave the president himself as a named unindicted co-conspirator. And that's how you get around dealing with the fact that he's in office.
Right. Or just do it.
Or you could just do it, because the Southern District of New York. And
do it anywhere. I mean, Mueller doesn't like the idea, but you could do it.
Yeah, but they're the sovereign district. They can do whatever they want.
Yeah, right. I don't like it, but it exists, so I'm doing it.
Anyway, so that's one of the things that people are saying. Let's see if they do it. Here's some more, but this is political, and it's just fascinating here. For example, Adam Schiff says Trump colluded with Russia.
He does.
He's the chair of the House Intelligence Committee.
Golly.
Jerry Nadler, who's Judiciary Committee. Do you think the president obstructed justice? See, the very word is in there. House Judiciary Committee, Jerry Nadler said, yes, I do. It's very clear that the president obstructed justice. So you have the individual committee chairs whose purview it is to look at this stuff, saying, as a matter of fact, House Judiciary is going to subpoena documents or request documents. First you request, and if they don't give them to you, then you subpoena, from over 60 people close to Trump. Why, that sounds just like what the RICO story about how Rudy Giuliani is going to bring down Donald Trump by setting it up to do stuff like this sounds like. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I'm not certain what kind of I'll have to read it. How he could bring him down? He's not going to actively participate in it, even by screwing up
he's
the
basically of the era that's responsible for RICO, because that's what he did when he was a crusading district attorney in his younger days.
Just like when RICO was written, Rudy Giuliani was alive. So
exactly.
There you go.
Anyway, here's some other stuff where maybe they say it, and let's see if they do it. Bowling Green Daily News. You remember Bowling Green? That's the site of a huge massacre that had Kellyanne Conway all for bludgeoned. Senator Paul vows to vote against giving Trump extra constitutional power. I can't vote to give the president the power to spend money that has been appropriated by Congress.
That's true.
That means he's the fourth vote to support Nancy Pelosi's extraordinary joint resolution of Congress disavowing the emergency measure that Trump did.
Yes.
And so with that fourth vote, and now that they don't have to be the vote that changes it, Paul is, others are going to come out of the woodwork. So that thing is going to pass.
I hope so. The real question, of course, will be, well, the real question is, one, that's Rand Paul you're talking about. After that, of course, the next question is, all right, so it gets vetoed. Where will you be on the override? And then people will suddenly discover new facts about, oh my gosh, I can't.
It's a huge embarrassment even then. Josh Chaffetz's a historian.
He's a huge embarrassment.
And professor of law, author of Congress's Constitution, says enough Republicans in the Senate, Collins, Murkowski, Tillerson, Paul, have now announced that they will vote for the resolution of disapproval of Trump's emergency declaration to ensure its passage and therefore a Trump veto.
Right.
And if you are having trouble following the convoluted thing, if you vote yes, you're voting against the president.
Yes, you're voting yes for this resolution that disapproves of what the president has done.
Therefore, yes means no, because like politics. Anyway, this points to the importance of the architecture of the National Emergencies Act, which, as Doug Kreiner and I discussed in this piece in the Washington Post, does not allow the usual gatekeeping mechanisms in either house to keep the resolution off the floor. So this is one of those rare situations where Mitch McConnell really can't block it.
Unless he does.
But that's the thing. It's like Rand Paul and Susan Collins, hardly, backbone people, announcing publicly they're going to do something. It's very hard to walk that back once you've done that.
I will engineer it.
It doesn't mean you
if
can't.
they want. I can
but
do
it makes it a lot harder to do it.
Yes, because shame. And you know how that is in politics.
Yeah, it works with everybody else except Trump, right? I get that. So nonetheless, McConnell could come up with something and change rules and this and that and everything else, but it looks really bad.
Yeah.
Anyway, given its passage and veto are now assured, I wouldn't be surprised if other GOP senators come out in favor of the resolution as well.
Yes.
This won't undo the emergency because there aren't enough votes to override the veto, but this is the part I'm reading because this is the part I thought was interesting. It's both a number of bad news cycles for Trump. Don't forget, he had the collapse of the Kim summit. He had Michael Cohen's testimony. He has people coming out and say they're going to vote against him when he has lobbied to vote for him. This is a really bad cycle for him. Then he's got stuff like the Fox News story coming out. It's both a number and the Jared Kushner, how did you get your clearance stuff coming out. It's both a number of bad news cycles for Trump, especially given public views about the emergency, and it is accustoming more and more GOP members of Congress to voting against him on important issues. This is like Schoolhouse Rock for Republican senators. Yes, you can vote against the president. This is how you do it.
Yeah, I guess, it'll be a first opportunity for some of them. Mitch McConnell's job, assuming he's not actually looking for a way out of holding the vote, is getting everybody, probably at lunch on Tuesday, to sit down and count them up. Okay, how many of you guys are going to vote? Who needs to vote yes to appear independent? Raise your hand, count them up. And if that number begins, now that Rand Paul is out, begins approaching override numbers, then you begin taking out the polling numbers and who's up for re-election and saying, okay, you can vote yes, but if there's a veto override vote and I can't prevent it, then you need to vote no on that one. Are you good with that? Yes? Okay. Just make sure we don't have 67 on override. 66
right. And that'll happen. I have no illusions whatsoever there'll be a veto override. But again, the public forcing Trump to do your first veto in the worst week of bad news cycles,
he may
fine.
relish this veto, and I'm sure he will. I mean, even if it was the worst thing in the world,
there's simply not enough of them to matter.
Even if it was obviously horrible and 99% of America realized what a disaster it was, he would still say, this is a huge victory. I'm vetoing this. I'm great.
Yeah, just like he had a huge victory in Vietnam.
Yes, which is now not only a huge victory, but in case you think it was a lousy defeat, that is the Democrats' fault.
Right.
That came out today.
So, interesting stuff here. This is Robert Costa writing in the Washington Post. The title is "We're Not Going to Turn on Our Own." That's a John Cornyn statement. It's basically, I know how bad it looks, and I know we're on the wrong side of everything, and I know that this is terrible, and I know that Trump is awful, but my gosh, you can't ask us to turn on our own. That would mean something. It would mean, maybe losing in November. We can't do that. If not this November, then next November. So the idea that the evangelical base is going to desert him is not where I'm going with any of this. I never assumed that.
Oh.
The major thing is it doesn't matter because what it does is it chases everybody else away. Now, with interesting corollaries to that, now there's new polling out, a very quality poll, NBC Wall Street Journal, with, you might call it mixed information only if you just skim the surface. The 2020 race will be uphill for Trump. That's pretty clear. But he has strong party loyalty. That's also pretty clear.
It should be upstairs. Then he won't make it.
Yeah. Just 4 in 10 voters say they would reelect him next year.
Okay.
58% don't think he's been honest and truthful regarding the Russia probe. And 60% disapprove of his recent national emergency declaration to build a border wall.
Record-breaking popularity.
But the president's job rating remains stable with nearly 90% of Republicans approving of his job. Yes, but with that, he still is losing.
Yeah, well, okay. There aren't as many Republicans.
Add it up, and 2020 is shaping up to be yet another close presidential race, says the Democratic and Republican pollsters who conducted the NBC Wall Street Journal survey. Actually, it's the Republican pollster who says that. The Democrat, Peter Hart, says it's 45-55 against the president at this stage of the game. That is not a close race. Now, folks would vote 41% Trump, 48% Democrats right now. Of course, the election's not right now. He's already losing, I say, in the pundit roundup with the best economy he's going to see. The base isn't enough, and there's more to come because RICO and all that other stuff. Harry Enton, looking at it, says, in the least shocking development of all time, NBC finds that Trump's net approval rating is -6 and his deficit to a generic Democrat is -7. Pretty simple. If Trump stays unpopular and Democratic candidate isn't radioactive, Trump will lose.
All right. Look out for a non-radioactive
So yes,
one.
I get that his base isn't moving. It isn't, says who, like Michael Cohen says, it's so what?
Oh. All right. Are we sure?
Yeah, we are sure.
Okay.
So, we have these committees going. The House is starting to do its job. This is one of those slow trains that you can see coming that you can't stop. And stuff's going to come out of it. Maxine Waters is starting to look at Deutsche Bank loans to Trump
exciting.
and where they came from. And, there's just so much stuff there. So, everybody in the committee is doing their purview thing. Even Ways and Means is starting to request Trump's tax returns, or at least they're laying the predicate for it, which is that they need it in order to write new law.
I'm like grimacing at that because they're moving super slow.
They are.
They are.
But there's no rush, do it right.
Okay. I mean, it's a letter. I'm done with it. But okay.
Well, maybe it's not sternly worded enough.
Oh, that could be. I'll put it in my man-sized safe and see if it ferments into anything sterner.
Right. We got a couple of 3 minutes left before the break, but I have to tell you it's going to be a relatively abbreviated session today because we got like a foot of snow, and I got to give myself time to get to work today.
You can't go.
So, yeah, well,
it's ridiculous. You can't be expected to. All right. Well,
I want Donald Trump to yell at that kid mowing his lawn, tell him to come out here and shovel my driveway.
Right. Somebody Photoshop a snowblower into that.
Something like that. Now, G. Elliott Morris, writing for Tegan Goddard at Political Wire, has a behind the paywall piece here, which is still pretty interesting, and you can get the gist of it. It says the economy no longer predicts presidential approval. Basically, he goes on to say it's all about partisanship. So it doesn't matter if the economy is up or down. The partisans are going to stick with Trump, and the other partisans on the other side are going to be against him. And, so it's not likely the economy is going to be better. It certainly may be that it slows a bit. We have some indications of that. And if that happens, or if Trump announced he won because he got China to back down and we're back at square one, which he started with, and if he announces that all of the things that he did to make things worse, he undid, and now he's back to where he was at the beginning, and therefore that's a huge win for him that nobody else could have done. The partisans will buy that, and it still doesn't matter. So what?
Oh.
The rest of the public won't. So, it's likely that Republicans will simply follow along and do whatever Trump says, and yet when you have other figures outside of the White House voting against Trump, for example, in the Senate on that emergency thing, well, we'll see how that all shakes out.
I guess so. Well, does it count in any way that there are 500 Democrats running for president?
Yeah, it's a big train. That's a lot of votes.
I guess so.
The thing is, it's not all in one state. So what you're doing is, you're kind of diluting it all. What we need is some Democratic candidate gerrymandering. We need to put them all in the same place.
Well, don't we
like
put them all
Iowa.
in Iowa in the end? Yeah, right. And then, so it'll be very interesting to see that there are 500 Democrats running. They go to Iowa. They have their caucus, and nobody's viable. There are no delegates ordered. I'm sorry. Good night. Everybody has to leave.
So everybody's doing their rollout. We still got to wait for Bader to get in the race. We still got to wait for Biden to get in the race. Then we'll see how it all shakes out. But, somebody, Hickenlooper's in, I guess.
Yes.
Eric Holder's out.
Right.
So at least one person's not running.
Yes.
Out of 360 million Americans.
Maybe this is why New Hampshire gets to go early, too. Everybody's in the state legislature, and now they'll know what to do when 500 Democrats show up and say they're all running for president.
Pretty much. After the break, we're going to talk a little bit about CPAC.
Okay, because that was crazy. I understand.
Well, that's, but you repeat yourself.
That's what the C is for, I guess. And, all right, well, we got a lot to catch up on there. Lots of people highlighted all sorts of weirdness, and some of it wasn't even from the president, I think. So we'll check in on that after 2 minutes, and then you'll have to leave because snow or something like that. We'll be right back. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, with a brand new interruption to say thanks to all of you who support the show. Remember when I told you that our average monthly donation was about $7, for which you were getting 2 great hours of news and entertainment 5 days a week, and how that came out to about 70 cents an hour? That's a pretty good deal, except it's wrong. The math actually works out closer to 17 cents an hour. It is hard to beat a deal like that, and even harder to send your kids to college on it. Thankfully, Patreon.com makes it easy to make that work. Patreon, Patreon.com, is the simple, secure way to make recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Just search for me or the show name on the site, and they make it easy to crowdfund the show so that the power of our numbers can keep the show going for just a few bucks a month. Once again, thanks so much for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We still have Greg Dworkin with us, and I guess we'll shift directions a little bit to cover the big weekend craziness at CPAC. I guess it's done. We missed our chance to lock them all in one building.
Oh, you could have gone.
Yeah. I guess I could have gone. You think I could have gotten in?
No.
Oh.
Laura Loomer couldn't get in. She wasn't crazy enough.
That I did hear that she spent most of the weekend running around trying to convince somebody there of something.
The security guards.
I'm not certain what.
The guys that look like they're out of, the movies with the earpiece and the bald heads and, the necks as thick as their bodies, saying,
the real ones,
you'll have
or
to take it up with the,
I've seen a lot of fake security guards. I guess one of those weirdo alt-right activists apparently brings people with him.
Well, let me put it this way. They look exactly like Matt Whitaker, okay?
Okay. Yeah, I did
that
see
helps you picture it.
I saw a picture of somebody like behind this guy. Is it Jacob Wall? Is that his? I can't recall if I have the name right.
No, Jacob Wall wasn't allowed in either.
Yeah, he was having a press conference and
in the lobby.
He put
he couldn't get in.
People behind him to dress up like a security guard to make it look like he was an important guy. So he just got some friends who weren't big enough to be security guards, but the costume was sunglasses and one Apple AirPod pod thing, the earphones, the wireless ones. Just put one in one ear and pretend that's your Secret Service earpiece. And he just, guy just stands there.
Did they dress in black?
Yeah,
Like Men in Black?
Sunglasses and a coat and one of these earphones. Like, okay. That'll work. Okay.
So, if you're having trouble and you need a scorecard, so Charlie Kirk is a guy who could get into CPAC and Jacob Wall is a guy who couldn't. In case you get them confused, because they're both potato heads.
You won't be able to tell the difference between their idiocy. I don't know what the deal. I guess they're invested in Charlie Kirk because they put money in his organization. Jacob Wall doesn't have any of that yet. Next year.
Yeah, he's a grifter, though, and he keeps trying. Anyway,
he'll get there.
So one of the things that happened is that when the Weekly Standard went under, because Republicans are extremely tribal, and if you say bad things about the president and conservatives, then they get mad at you. So the Weekly Standard goes under, and most of their staff winds up, and I don't know who's funding them, starting a new site called The Bulwark, which I often cite on the Pundit Roundup and I mentioned on the show.
Ah, yes.
And it's got one of my favorite writers there who happens to be a liberal. Her name is Molly Jung Fast. She's very good in terms of writing. Sometimes she writes about herself and her family. Of course, her mom is the famous Erica Jung. But sometimes she writes about politics and other things. And they sent her, The Bulwark did, just to be contrary, I suppose. But they wrote about why they sent her in a piece that they published, CPAC Abortion and a Note on What We Do Here from The Bulwark. So they sent her to CPAC, and she had some hilarious tweets because, as they point out in the article, she's got a really good eye for absurdity. And CPAC conservatives went ballistic. And they, of course, had not nice things to say about Molly, but that doesn't matter. They had a bunch of not nice things to say about The Bulwark, and by extension, never Trump conservatives. So what it did is kind of expose this fault line between the I lean against Trump, but I hate when you say bad things publicly because, as John Cornyn says, we're not going to turn on our own, so we'll just turn on the Never Trumpers because we outnumber them, so it seems safe. And they've been yelling and screaming about this. And one of the key points here is they've really seized on this whole thing about the lie, and it is a lie, about infanticide as their rallying cry. Because just like they thought that running against Nancy Pelosi was going to win the 2018 elections, they think running about infanticide is going to win the 2020 elections. You can't run on Trump because he's a disaster and he's losing. And besides, they don't like him. So you got to pick something else. And if you're the evangelical base, and I always emphasize this because this is where this is coming from, then running against infanticide seems like a good deal. It's got everything. It's got what you always wanted anyway. It doesn't matter. You're lying about it. And so if you have somebody like pro-life Molly Jung Fast writing about CPAC, you're obviously having somebody from the moral enemy who must be annihilated showing up in your midst, and, you can't have that. Satan can't go to heaven and cover it for the hell times, I mean, that's not like how it works. So they really, really, really were upset that they were there, and by extension, they were upset with the Bulwark because clearly they're on the wrong side of the infanticide issue, because if you follow that, then you'll understand everything you need to know about conservative politics.
I guess. I mean, what about the QAnon people?
Unclear.
Where they are, okay.
They never tell you. That's the whole thing.
And
besides, there's only 5 of them.
I guess so.
So this is a piece by the editor, Jonathan Last, CPAC Abortion and a Note on What We Do Here. So if you think I'm crazy to tie abortion to CPAC, to Molly Jung Fast and the Bulwark, no. This is what happened. And so he writes, when I tweeted out Molly Jung Fast's first dispatch for us from CPAC, I said she was going to break Twitter, and I was right. People are very angry at her and me and the Bulwark right now. Some of these people aren't thinking carefully. Some are bad actors. Some are friends who think we've made a serious mistake. Let's take the groups in order. The knee-jerk complaint is, how dare the Bulwark publish criticism of the pro-life movement? What kind of baby-killing monsters are you? This is them writing. So, I mean, I wasn't making this stuff up. This is like how it's showing up. The Bulwark didn't publish any criticism of the pro-life movement. The Bulwark is unlikely to publish any criticism of the pro-life movement. So you understand my own bias. He's from the pro-life movement. He's one of the more reasonable conservatives. He wrote at one point, before you start flipping ahead, let me make a promise. I'm one of those anti-abortion nut jobs who thinks every embryo is sacred life and abortion is killing an innocent and blah, blah, blah. But when it comes to abortion, most Americans aren't crazies like me. They think abortion should be, in essence, legal, but somewhat restricted and rare. So without my pushing judgment of any kind, let me just give you the brief demographic tour as to how abortion has affected American fertility, and so he can talk about it. But his point of view is, I get that I'm in the minority, and I have my views, and you have yours, and I'm not going to demonize you for it. That's what kind of conservative he is, and that's how come I always enjoy arguing with him. And he writes, that was then, now he writes, I've paid some small price for my pro-life views over the years. He's being sarcastic. For instance, when the New Yorker reviewed what to expect, Elizabeth Colbert wrote that Jonathan Last has aimed his book at the same sort of readers who subscribe to the Weekly Standard. Well, yeah, he used to work at the Weekly Standard.
Okay, so it stands to reason, I suppose, even though you could branch out a little.
I suppose. Anyway, this is where he's coming from, so he's establishing his credentials.
All right.
And then says, so I sent Molly Jong-Fast the report from CPAC for the Bulwark, and I did this because she's a great writer with a great eye for absurdity. I threw in the great. He just said writer. And because CPAC is absurd, and it has been absurd for 20 years. For as long as I've been in Washington, CPAC was the creature cantina of conservatism.
Oh.
It was a joke during the Gingrich Revolution. It was a joke when Mitt Romney went there insisting he was a severe conservative. It's a joke now that the torch has been passed to Charlie Kirk and Seb Gorka and Laura Loomer.
Well, you didn't get the torch, though. But okay.
Seb Gorka, by the way, forever on, shall be known as Seb Gorka, the Dragon of Budapest. And that is one of Molly Jong-Fast's labels. It's great.
Oh, okay. I thought you were going to say White House Nazi, but...
No, that's Stephen Miller.
Oh, okay.
Because Gorka isn't in the White House now.
That doesn't matter.
Funnily enough, I sent someone there to cover it too, someone who was deeply pro-life and a pretty hardcore social conservative. He never filed a piece because he explained to me the trouble with CPAC, there's a quote, is I was going in to counter-program a little by trying to do some silver lining stuff, but no, it's trash pretty much top to bottom, and the misanthropic take is the honest one.
Okay, well, I'm glad they got to that. I saw a S.E. Cup complaining all weekend that now CPAC is garbage, but it used to be where serious conservatives exchanged ideas. I'm glad to see them saying, no, it isn't.
Like, I don't know. And so that's, one of the things that I thought was just worthwhile to remind people. It was never good.
That is correct.
It's just that it was considered fringe. Now it's the RNC.
Yeah, that's true. And at the same time, a loony bin.
And now it's the RNC.
Place.
But
yeah.
I repeat myself.
Yes.
Right. Okay. So as far as the second part, that the Bulwark should only publish the views of people who agree with our institutional positions, 100%, this assumes a view of public life that is pathetically crippled. Look, I don't know you. This is the Internet. You could be a dog or a Martian or Bryce Harper. But I know this. The only way you're going to find someone with the exact same matrix of political preferences as you is looking in the mirror. So, can you extract value by reading the work of people who don't agree with you? If the answer is no, this isn't the place for you, he says. And, same as my pundit roundup. I put conservatives there all the time, and people get mad at me in the comments, and they don't get it. Why are you wasting space? Valuable real estate. Well, because it's interesting. Who says it's interesting? Me, because I put it together. You think it's interesting? Then fine. If you don't think it's interesting, put your own together. Yeah. One of the things about that platform is it lets you do that.
True. Lets you comment, too. But
all of those things. So thanks for reading. Thanks for commenting. But no, I'm going to write what I want to write, and I'm going to read who I want to read.
That is the bottom line. That's how it works with writing. If you either do it or you don't.
Then he talks about Ben Domenech and what a jerk he is.
Oh, okay.
And he basically shares Ben Domenech's original views, which is to say that if you want diversity, that's fine. But speaking of Ben Domenech, he says this brings us to the section about bad actors. Okay. So he likes Domenech, but the problem is that he's from a site, The Federalist, which I would point out nobody knows who pays for them, The website he runs has published everything from an affirmative defense of Roy Moore's affinity for teenage girls to a snuff fantasy that included, how much it would be fun to kill somebody. So those aren't tweets from people who wrote for the Federalist, but actual pieces that were edited and published on the Federalist. And you tell me what the garbage organization is. So all of which is to say the criticisms from bad actors aren't worth paying attention to. And I subscribe to that philosophy myself. That's why I'm much faster at blocking people on Twitter these days. There's no point. I mean, if you're coming in there with bad intent and all you want to do is crap stir, then why should I or anybody who reads my feed pay any attention to you whatsoever and waste their time? If I mute you, then other people still get to see you. I don't want that.
I usually mute because I'm mostly concerned with myself. But there are probably some good people to block out there. But it's too late. I muted them and I don't know who they are anymore. It works pretty well for me. I'm happy.
Anyway, it's a very good written piece about their position, which may not be your position or my position. I don't read it because I agree with them all that much, but I agree with them on a lot of things. And it's worthwhile reading people who don't agree with you. So I try to find out who they are, identify them, and then go back to them. And when people are just jerks, like the people who write for the Federalist, then no.
Yes. Okay. Fair enough. He likes Eric Erickson. Look at that.
Well, they're conservatives, and they share a worldview, and they all know each other. And I'm just saying that the fight that he is describing is real, and it's part of the conservative movement, and it's interesting to know about. But Democrats in disarray.
Well, yes, Democrats, unlike Republicans, the Republican approach to viewing this fight from the outside would be to send weapons to one side. And so
it would be to block you all, so you can't see it.
All right, that's possible. I mute it, true, but we realize by now it would not be wise necessarily to arm Eric Erickson in the fight against right-wing lunatics because, like every time we've, as a country, armed people against whatever we were afraid of for the moment, they come back to,
what's on the Taliban? What could go wrong?
Yeah, right. I mean, it's just limiting it only to Afghanistan. There's plenty of examples.
Right. Anyway, so it was a pretty interesting week last week. A lot of bad things happened for the president. Yes, I do think they matter in a cumulative sense, but because when you have that much bad news, some of it even seeps over to Fox News, the propaganda station, and they start, the people who watch it start hearing about it, kind of sets you up for what comes next. For example, now it won't be a shock if and when the Senate actually votes against Trump for the first time.
Yes.
So still a lot more to play out, but I'm one of those, diehard optimists that thinks this country is better than this, even though I know well that this is the country that, like, half of us were on the wrong side of the Civil War, and that hasn't changed. But nonetheless, I don't think Trump's going to win in 2020, and I'm not even sure he's going to be around.
Well, I hope for that, certainly.
We'll see.
Yeah, we will see, I guess. And in the meantime, let's all hug the flag or something. I think I learned that from the weekend, too.
Right, and thanks to Rebecca Romans, I know to dedicate this show to Representative Clay Higgins, the word of the boxes guy.
Yeah, I wonder if he's been satisfied.
I want them given to an authority.
Authority,
I
guess. All right, well, we'll see what kind of authority he would accept for that. I wonder whether he's still mad about that or learned over the weekend what happened.
I told you that watching that, I watched most of it, but I didn't really watch it. I listened to it on the radio.
What?
The hearings.
Okay, yeah, all right.
And what I learned is that Republicans yell, and I guess I can't be Republican because I'm just not that good at yelling.
Right. Well, God help us if they ever find, graphic equalizers and you can't tell anymore. Stealth Republicans.
The Republicans are the one who say Democrat Party.
Oh, yeah.
That's the other clue you can get on the air.
Okay.
If you don't know who's speaking.
They need
First,
some sort of
is it a guy? Second, does he say Democrat Party? And third, is he yelling? Then you are a Republican.
I guess that'll do it. There's no disguising it at all, huh? All right.
Right. Anyway, take care, and I will talk to you Wednesday, weather permitting.
Yeah, I mean, weather's not gotten in the way all that often, but all right. You never know. And yeah, are you in for more snow? Is that what I heard?
I
Or
can't
no?
tell. They keep warning us that something might happen, but we'll have to wait and see.
Trump.
Actually, we should get some good weather, some nice stretches of 39 degrees or something.
Oh, beautiful. Yeah. Well, it's a good
Hey,
match
but you know
for
what's
ours.
happening this weekend? The clocks. The clocks
Already?
are turning again.
They should. Have they ever thought of flipping the standard time to the other one? And because we spend more time on daylight time now than standard. Is
Well,
that
maybe they
standard?
should. Maybe they should. Set the clocks
too
back
confusing.
again, so it gets dark at 4 o'clock or
They
something.
should do 2 hours and then skip next year.
I think
that
they
work?
should just, randomly distribute the amount of time you turn the clocks back. This steak gets 2 hours, that steak gets 3. This one gets
Yeah?
an hour and a half. That one gets 7 hours.
Based on the
just mix
Electoral
them up,
College
pull them out of a
results.
bowl or something, like
Oh.
they do when you have tied congressional races, and just make it interesting.
It would. I think it's sort of what happens in Indiana or part of it, right? Don't they just sort of do their own
Well, the
thing?
Florida Panhandle,
We don't know what
right?
time it is. Oh, them too, right? Well, it's there's a brotherhood for you.
We're the same time as the rest of Florida, except for the rest of Florida.
Well, you can't go wrong imitating Florida, man.
Yeah, that's true. Anyway, like I say, take care. This is Greg Dorkin speaking with my good friend Kagro in the morning. I looked that up in terms of how to pronounce it. And I will see you on Wednesday.
All right, very good. That's Wednesday. We'll see you then. All right. What the hell am I going to do now? Now it's all over. Okay. Lots to recap. I mean, my inclination is to go to Pocket just in case something like serious really actually needs to be discussed. But my desire actually is to go back to Twitter and the Twitter feed and pull up the craziness that I retweeted this weekend. And I guess the business side says you should go and read Jane Mayer and just discuss that. But I think we're probably better served. You'll probably all read it. Maybe we'll discuss it a little bit later. There's just too much. And literally every few minutes, somebody just tweets a new outrage from the Jane Mayer piece. So if you haven't read it, you'd probably do well to do so at some point. We'll have to discuss it. And if you are one of the people who are reading it and tweeting each new outrage, please do me a favor. I am enjoying the tweets that have screen caps and highlighting most because it's so dismaying to see people tweet some story that's like, wow, that's outrageous. I would love to let me see that. I need to interpret it for myself. That's what I use links for. That's what you use links for. And I go to click on the link and I say, oh, damn it. It's a link to the New Yorker. It's going to be the Jane Mayer piece. And it's, wow, I found this sentence is outrageous. Oh, it's going to take me 14 hours to find the sentence. Just show me the screen cap. So that should be internet and Twitter protocol going forward. Are you discussing a Jane Mayer article or something Mayer-esque in terms of its length? Grab the screen that it's on, highlight the sentence, send it around, let us see some context. If we need more than that, then that's our fault and we have to click through. But if I want to see, is that being quoted accurately? You're going to have to show it to me with something like that. I can't click through to the Jane Mayer piece and sort that out. That's impossible. All right, let's see. What is this? Greg sends me another note here via Twitter, but I'm not certain what it is. Okay, it just says reporters. Is it, what? Are we groaning? Reporters. Who can understand them? Right? Sloppy, lazy, jokers, whatever it is. Okay, let's see. I don't even know where to start, like I said, but I'm going to go to Pocket and see what we have in the way of stories beyond Jane Mayer. I did mention to you this morning that the official line from the, Trump administration, just Trump himself, nobody knows whether it's anything more than just him musing. But I have this headline from The Hill, so you know it's in The Hill because that's what I just said. There's nothing really I can tell you about The Hill and the reliability of their reporting. Sometimes I hate them, and other times I say, well, it's a story and I'll read it. So Chris Mills Rodrigo files this one under the headline, Trump blames Cohen hearing for North Korea summit failure. The idea here being, as we mentioned earlier in the show, the North Korea summit in Vietnam failed because it's the Democrats' fault. They undermined me when I was ready to make a great deal. And there's lots of reporting about this one, and because it's an important part of our foreign policy picture, we have to spend some time on it. It matters to some degree in the rest of the world when Americans declare a foreign policy priority and they blow it. I mean, this should never really have been the foreign policy priority that it became, although, preventing nuclear war, that's a big priority and you want to keep it there. But it never really should have escalated to get that much attention. I think previous presidents had it mostly right in playing it in a different way. Nuclear war, always a serious subject, always something you want to avoid. And I guess always something of a serious threat from a regime like North Korea, if we believe they actually have the weapons. And I guess, I don't know, it's worse if they have the delivery systems, but if they don't, having nuclear things blow up, no matter where they end up blowing up, is probably not a great idea. But, keeping them in their niche in foreign policy was a big deal. It made a difference. But now, whatever. Now it's front and center, and it's the best friend of our president that we're dealing with here. So, la-di-da. Now we have to have them on the front pages. And so, unsurprisingly, the deal-making venture between two loons didn't work out. Is anybody surprised? Apparently the president is, and he needs someone to blame for it. Even though he came back and said it was a huge victory, et cetera, et cetera. And there's lots of reporting about how the thing broke apart, by the way. I don't know if I put any of those in Pocket, but it seems like Trump... how do we put this? I think Trump went back to his art of the deal mode and said, I think if I recall correctly, one of the things that I said that was important in deal making is willingness to walk away. And I haven't walked away from anything lately, so I'm going to walk away from this one. I need to engineer something to use as a reason to walk away. And most of the reporting is that the North Koreans, or maybe generally, or perhaps just Kim Jong-un, but I think it's largely the same, came to the summit ready to, settle on something. Whether or not they really thought they were settling on total denuclearization or not, it's hard to tell. But apparently the sanctions regime that was disagreement over which was apparently at the heart of the breakup of the negotiations was not really a serious issue as between the two parties. It seems like Trump says that Kim insisted on a complete removal of all sanctions in exchange for something. And he claimed it was something less than total denuclearization, which is the sort of thing that people would assume. If you're going to lift all the sanctions, it better be for total denuclearization, right? But the North Koreans, if they're to be believed, insist that that was not actually in the offing. It wasn't what they were asking for. They weren't necessarily insisting on lifting all sanctions against their country from the United States. But Trump needed to walk away because he once wrote in The Art of the Deal that you need to be willing to walk away, and he hasn't walked away. So that he said, no, I have to walk away because they were insisting on something ridiculous, the removal of all sanctions even before they denuclearize, and I can't have that. So I walked away. And apparently, again, the reporting is that it has left, the funny thing is, it's left the North Korean regime, Kim Jong-un, scratching his head and wondering, do I really understand the way Americans work, or are they just crazy? So that's the impression we've left them with, which is not the worst thing in the world. I don't know if it matters a great deal whether or not Kim Jong-un trusts Americans. I don't think he was going to trust Americans, even if he came to trust Trump. I assume that he would have come away with the understanding that, oh, well, Trump is an idiot. And I believe him when he says something idiotic. I believe he believes it. Any other president, I would just be hedging my bets. I don't know. They could be being cagey. This guy is just an idiot, and I believe him. Anyway, Trump now blames our having pestered him. You know, he's rediscovered the politics ends at the water's edge axiom, which used to actually apply to trips involving all sorts, co-delegation trips. The president would go abroad with members of Congress from the other party, and it was supposed to mean, well, you don't criticize the president when you're overseas with him on foreign soil. And then it got expanded later when Republican presidents went abroad and tried to do something stupid, and Democrats said, that's a stupid thing. It was reinterpreted, and then the rule became, well, you don't criticize the president when he's overseas, which really was never supposed to be the rule. But then, of course, it got expanded, and now he uses it as the excuse. So the piece here says, President Trump on Sunday linked Michael Cohen's hearing before the House Oversight Panel to the collapse of his negotiations with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un last week. Now, ahead of the discussions, he explicitly said that was an impossibility. So, whatever. The Cohen hearing and Trump's summit with Kim were held nearly simultaneously, as you all know, with Cohen's hearing beginning a few hours after Trump met Kim in Hanoi. Trump and Kim got together again hours after Cohen's all-day affair, which was covered live by most of the cable news networks. But as you know, there's probably no way to shut off cable news coverage from America there in Hanoi, Vietnam, when you're meeting with the North Korean dictator. But apparently they broke through. The summit ended early, though, after Kim demanded, they say here, the U.S. lift all sanctions on his country without North Korea completely ending its nuclear program. Trump said the timing of the Cohen hearing was a, quote, new low in politics. I doubt he would know what that meant. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I'm going to have to leave this page open to try and find the writing that I was referring to that told us that Kim was somewhat surprised and confused at the sudden end being called, and during which the North Koreans denied the American position that the Koreans were demanding a lifting of all sanctions. Although, you would think that they would ask for that eventually, but that was apparently the case. I don't know who's spinning which. It's impossible to tell. They're both crazy, but both spins are out there, and I don't know. We'll have to sort them out at some point. Whether we'll ever be able to untangle who did what, I don't know, and things are only made more difficult by the lack of any official reporting or readouts from the American side of almost any diplomatic encounter. So that's very bad news. And it'll be difficult. It'll make history difficult to write, much less interpret, which is probably, you could make the case to me that it's a long-term goal of certain Trumpists like Steve Bannon and perhaps Stephen Miller, who love to bask in the glory of these big ideas about undoing history in some way, and what do they say, deconstructing the administrative state, whatever the hell that's supposed to mean. They love to think that they're thinking in big terms. All right, let's go to some of the other stories that I have set aside in pocket, because there are some big ones and some varied ones, and I have a feeling that sticking to the Twitter feed would be beating very worthy horses, that is, worthy of beating, but dead nonetheless. So, perhaps some other stories. Here's a good reminder. of things to think about from Walter Schaub, who always is tweeting various good things to think about or important things to think about. He's latched on to a Trump tweet, which struck most people as a little weird or perhaps even difficult to understand. Trump tweeting along with a retweet of a tweet from the Trump Organization. The Trump Organization, which is the business, from which, of course, he's separated himself. Yeah, right. Tweeting about the fabulousness of their Scotland golf course. The landscape framework of the Trump Scotland comes close to an ideal. There is nothing missing here, and there are no weak holes. Dr. Martin Hawtrey, apparently, is behind this quote. And they picked it up. People pass it around, whatever you're going to do with this thing. Separated from the businesses or not, these golf courses do continue to exist, and they're going to promote themselves. But Trump picked it up and tweeted out, along with it, very proud of perhaps the greatest golf course anywhere in the world. Period. End of sentence would have been okay there, except you would have said, well, shouldn't you have been separate from that? Should you now be promoting this? This is something you would allegedly maybe separated yourself from, maybe not. Sort of inappropriate for you to be promoting it now, whether you actually separated it or not. But no, had to make it worse from there. Very proud of perhaps the greatest golf course anywhere in the world, you wish. Also, furthers UK relationship. And people said, what does that mean exactly? And Walter Schaub has this thought on it. Think about this tweet. A lot of people thought this, and he just happens to put it particularly well. How could the personal property of the president further relations between two countries? His statement is meaningless unless, and there's a great explanation for the unless, but do keep in mind that his statement could in fact be entirely meaningless. He didn't mean it to be. It just might be because it's idiocy. But okay, his statement is meaningless unless he wants foreign governments to know the key to a good relationship with America, the country, is to further its president's personal interests. In other words, an invitation to emoluments. It's good. My owning a golf course in Scotland furthers the UK relationship. The UK relationship of who? And of course, in court, he said, well, me, personally, my business with the UK, that's a permissible relationship to have. What he really meant, of course, because he's president of the United States, is it will improve relations and maintain relations between the United States and the United Kingdom, which is supposed to have a special relationship anyway. See, I don't know, history. And instead, substituting essentially the idea that when things go bad for a Trump business in the UK, things will go badly as between the United States of America, because I am that thing, because president, and the United Kingdom. You'll be in trouble if things go badly. And now that's, of course, perhaps, a lot of people speculated, linked to, no pun intended, links, the fact that the Scottish government apparently involved in litigation with the Trump golf course there. The litigation wasn't their idea. It was Trump's idea. I guess the Scottish government had in mind a alternative energy, renewable energy project, wind turbines, offshore wind turbines, off the coast of Scotland, and I guess visible from the Trump golf course, which drove Trump crazy because no idea. I've run out of time. He doesn't like, he thinks having wind turbines ruins the view. Now, I mean, a lot of people somehow have come to that conclusion for whatever reason. And they're usually, whatever. The rich people who love their ocean views or who paid a lot of money for them don't want wind turbines in their view. I think wind turbines are actually kind of interesting to look at. And, but I understand that, like, okay, well, I'm here for like the nature or whatever. That and smashing a golf ball with iron clubs. Nature. So, I mean, if you're playing seriously, you're focused on what you're focusing on. I'm the ball, and I'm trying to hit it in that hole over there. There's a little flag in it. Doesn't ruin my view of nature to see that little flag. I'm playing golf. But whatever. The windmill out there, as annoying as it could be, maybe it's powering the refrigerator that keeps my beer cold or whatever it is that I drink. My favorite beverage that I will enjoy when I get over there. But no. Apparently this ruins everything. Windmills almost never get in the way of your golf shot. They make no noise. They want to keep it quiet for you to be hitting the golf ball. No noise that you would be able to hear. But they ruin the view, even though you're not there to be at the beach. You're there to play golf, but you want to be able to, I don't know. I want to get two things in at once. I want to see the ocean and play golf. I understand the idea of beautiful scenery. Anyway, involved in a lawsuit, Trump sues the government, I guess, of Scotland to block this wind farm, I guess you would call it, off the coast near his golf course and loses the case, which is not terribly surprising, but also not terribly surprising. The Scottish court orders the Trump organization to pay the attorney's fees of the government for bringing this stupid suit and losing. And this is an interesting thing. And David Farenthold sort of tweeted it out over the weekend. I hope I put that aside. We'll see if we can go find it. Or he posed it as a sort of reverse emoluments question. What are we supposed to do with this? How would the founders have viewed the idea that U.S. foreign relations with another country could be colored by that country requiring fee payments, a fine be paid by a company from which the President of the United States, who owned it, has never separated, and who has this particular mental issue of being unable to separate himself even mentally from these things. And he takes the Scottish court's findings against the Trump organization's Scottish golf course as a personal affront to him. And so you have this weird situation of the Scottish government says Donald Trump, in Donald Trump's mind, Donald Trump owes us X million dollars because he lost this lawsuit. Is Trump now going to be anti-Scotland or anti-UK in its entirety because he's mad about the outcome of this case? And the answer is probably yes. And that's a whole facet of the story that didn't get covered in Walter Schaub's tweet, which just hints at the larger portion, which is, this is a bad news if the special relationship between the United States and the United Kingdom ends up getting stood on its head because Trump had a stupid idea about suing the Scottish government and lost, and the Scottish government was not that happy about having it happen, but says, all right, well, you want to have the lawsuit, you're going to have to pay for the whole thing. That's fine. I'll totally win. And then he didn't. Another episode of you are really good at getting things done or whatever, dotard. But now he owes them money, which is, as Farenthold says, sort of a reverse emoluments problem. And if he pressures them to forego collecting the payment, then that's an emolument all by itself. And I guess you could construct, you don't have to view it as a reverse emolument. You could construct a way of thinking of it as an emolument itself if they either forbear on collection or forbear on, I guess, their right to prosecute a contempt proceeding if he were to refuse to pay, and they did not forbear in demanding that the fine be settled, huh? I don't know, but it's an interesting new angle on the emoluments problem. And of course, one among many. It's very difficult to, I don't know if I could even agree with Farenthold that this is something that the founders didn't envision in the emoluments clause. I mean, I think certainly this situation should never have come up because no president should have been able to continue in office this closely connected to personal business holdings in the United States or elsewhere. This all should have been, he should have separated from all of his businesses, even a fake separation like other presidents have done, would have been preferable to this. And so they might not have envisioned this exact scenario, but this exact scenario would nonetheless have been prevented by a strict adherence to what was previously our common understanding of the emoluments clause and how it applied. Which I guess brings me to at least one of the things that I tweeted over the weekend. And this in a different problem area, I guess. Seeing Lawrence Tribe tweet about this story late last night, and then having people comment to me, and quite correctly, "What are you doing commenting on this story? You should be in bed so you can get up early and do the show." I stay up late. Lawrence Tribe tweeting about Glenn Kirshner's writings here. There's no consensus yet, but Glenn Kirshner, if you want to follow him on Twitter, Glenn Kirshner 2, is right. The policy against indicting a sitting president is inconsistent with the constitutional axiom that nobody is above the law. That policy must be reconsidered. It needs to be rejected. That's what Lawrence Tribe is tweeting, and I was just sort of noting that, it reminded me that the idea that you can't indict a sitting president is, well, for one thing, it's not a law. It's not a constitutional thing. It is derived from Office of Legal Counsel, OLC, legal opinions and memoranda. And it's been a guideline for the Department of Justice for a long time. But like emoluments and our common understanding of what you're supposed to do to avoid the emoluments problem, it is just another one of many things, now a growing list of norms, laws, constitutional provisions, legal opinions, whatever, that we've run up against in the last, 15 years or so. I mark it to the George W. Bush administration, though it certainly happened in a similar but slightly different form in earlier Republican administrations, but it's really reached a crescendo here in the last 15 years or so. But all of these things, a long list of things that we now realize are from another era, like the voting rights section and the laws, the statutes governing their process in reviewing voting rights restrictions, in reviewing congressional and other legislative districting in southern states. All of these ideas, and of course the politicization of, well, every department, but in particular under the George W. Bush administration, the Justice Department and the Civil Rights Division within it and the Voting Rights Division within that, plus any number of other instances of these things. This is, we're finding over and over again that our norms and in some cases codified statutes are inadequate to the current situation or the situations that have arisen over the last 15 years where there was no enforcement mechanism. Political shame was supposed to be an adequate enforcement mechanism for these things. Of course, you wouldn't have to worry about the fact that you can't indict a sitting president because you'll never have to indict a sitting president. No president facing a credible threat of indictment would remain in office. They will resign. And if they don't, you can impeach them. But if they don't, the fact that they won't would lead to their impeachment because it was no easier in the Watergate era, although no one doubted of the likelihood of impeachment, it was never any easier to get 2/3 of the Senate together on the same page then as it is now. You could mourn the long lost moderate Republicans or whatever, but it was initially a very tough road to hoe. It was not likely. Eventually we got there, and that's part of the reason why people are agitating for hearings and investigations, and let's start the process, all of which is true. But it also, it was a different era in that, and the outcome was indicative of that era. Nixon resigned. He wasn't impeached. They didn't even have to get to impeachment in the House. It was very likely. That's easier, of course, to impeach in the House than it is to remove in the Senate. And even if most people thought that removal was a likely outcome then, it wasn't easily demonstrable, even at that point. But it didn't matter because the credible threat of it happening was enough for even Richard Nixon. I remember what kind of guy he was. Even Richard Nixon to see the writing on the wall and say, even like now, I'm not certain that Nixon does the same thing, right? Nixon says, well, I see the writing on the wall, but who cares? Let him write it. They're going to have to drag me out of here kicking and screaming. Certainly Trump would think that. It's almost difficult to believe that Nixon would come to the same conclusion now if you could pick him up and drop him in this era. And if you do, drop him on his head. But it's difficult to imagine him believing that the shame was too much for him. But it happened then, and I think I think it's a bygone era. No president will have to be indicted because they'll resign long before you have to resolve the question. No president would politicize, would openly interview U.S. attorney candidates by asking them, are you on the team and will you prosecute this thing so that we can prevent Democrats from winning any more elections? Because they would resign if they were caught over things like that. Well, not George W. Bush. He wouldn't either. And so on and so on. But it seems to me like every time we run into one of these things, no Senate Majority Leader would simply refuse to have a vote on a Supreme Court nomination simply because it was proposed by a president of the other party. They would resign in shame before they did. Oh, look at that. They went ahead and did that too, huh? So just a reminder that, things have changed. Nothing has changed, and yet many things have, I guess. A growing list, in my mind anyway, of things that used to be beyond question about whether or not they would drive someone to resign. And so therefore, no enforcement mechanism was specified. You wouldn't obviously specify an enforcement mechanism in a legal opinion, but reconciling the two forces here that Tribe recognizes. One, the policy preference not to ever indict a sitting president because, and there were lots of underlying legal reasons for it, some of which, by the way, I don't think apply at all in this instance. I mean, chief among them was that the president was too important a personage to be distracted and dealt with two issues of such importance that it would be a danger to the national security to distract him from them, which would happen if he were under indictment and did what most people would choose to do under indictment, present a vigorous defense. However, there's nothing to distract this president from. This president literally has nothing to do. That's how he found time after returning from an alleged summit over nuclear weaponry to give a 2.5-hour crazy-ass rambling speech to a bunch of lunatics at CPAC. No president should ever have the time for that. That's crazy. But there's nothing to distract this president from. And even if there were, there would be no way you could prove to me, beyond a reasonable doubt or whatever standard you wanted to use in courts, there would be no way you could prove to me that, A, he was going to pay attention to those things anyway. B, certainly not for that length of time. C, there would be no reason to assume he understood what he was being asked to concentrate on. And D, he has no interest in concentrating on them in the first place. Distracting this and I guess E, it's probably the best thing going for national security is if Donald Trump has his mind elsewhere, because if he's actually expressing a policy preference on anything, it's getting screwed up. So the more distracted he is, the better. So all by itself, that's reason to rethink the usual preference for thinking of a sitting president as unindictable. But if you need to reconcile the otherwise irreconcilable tension between not indicting a sitting president and the general premise that, quote, no one is above the law, then you could, I think you could simply settle it this way and say, yeah, well, it's in favor of no one is above the law. That's not enshrined in law anywhere. And in fact, I guess you could say from a legal perspective, it's the memos and opinions that say a president can't be indicted that are the stronger basis for deciding to do something. There's no legal memo anywhere that says, well, as you know, no one is above the law. That's just sort of a saying that we have. We like to think that that's the case. But I would have to say, yeah, if you're going to have to settle those two things, or the tension between them, settle it in favor of, what the hell, indict the president and see how it goes. This is basically about all I can tell you about that one. This president, very little danger in experimenting with that. Other presidents, that's true. It might pose more of a problem. But, again, you could indict them and simply say, yeah, I really thought that most presidents would react to we originally thought that most presidents would react to the threat of indictment with resignation. That not being the case, we will indict you and give you the chance at that point to say, yeah, I can't adequately do the job. I will resign. But most presidents probably wouldn't even necessarily take a Trump. It's not like Trump changed. I think a lot of things changed in politics, and a lot of people would say, I'm not resigning. To hell with it. In which case, then the Congress can decide whether or not you are up to the task by impeaching you, or your cabinet can decide whether or not you're too distracted by having you setting you aside as president until you can deal with your issues. I mean, I think that'll settle it. The 25th Amendment is a pretty good argument against the idea that you can't indict a sitting president. It might not be your preference, but maybe you would find in some cases you simply have to. And how does the 25th Amendment deal with that? The vice president says, as unfair as I think this is, as politically driven as I think this is, and I don't want to give the political opposition, if that's who Mueller actually was, except he's a Republican, so they have a difficult time convincing people of that. It's unfair, but that's also why we have a vice president. There's a backup system here. The two of us ran on the same ticket. Fine. The president needs to defend himself against an indictment, and that's it's only fair to give him every opportunity to defend himself personally and to put his all into it, because it's a very serious thing that's being charged here. Go ahead and do it. I got the country for the time being. I'll take care of these things. That's what the system has laid out for us. I don't think it's really all that difficult to reconcile, but your mileage may vary. All right, coming up on yet another break here. I didn't intend to stay on that long, but sometimes that's the best way of dealing with those things. Let's say we got other directions we can go. AP's fact check of the president's, as they say, epic speech, which they also note was laced with fabrications. Can you believe it? I don't know whether we necessarily need to share the AP's view of it, but it might be just enough to say, yes, once again, even the relatively mild-mannered Associated Press is running with the headline, yeah, the speech was crazy and full of nonsense. We probably could and should take note at least of one more thing, one more craziness to emerge from the speech. We'll just lay down this marker. At some point, the president blurted out, and I'm not sure how he led up to it, that he was, and he intended to sign an executive order that would withhold federal grant funds from colleges and universities around the country unless they support free speech. We're not sure what that's supposed to mean. And of course, somebody did point out the irony of having a demand of support of free speech from the president who wants to shut down Saturday Night Live. But that's out there too. That should be really fun. I wonder how we'll interpret that one. My marker, I bet there is no order and never is one. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. Checking the Twitter machine just to check in on things and seeing a lot of interesting stories we may have to divert to. But in case I was unclear as we exited into the break, my guess is that the president's threatened executive order allegedly withholding federal funds from colleges and universities unless they uphold freedom of speech. Long story short, I'm guessing, one, they have never contemplated such an executive order, and that they may never get around to issuing such an executive order. I had just said over the weekend, this is my countdown beginning to having to file Freedom of Information Act requests of the White House demanding the text or proposed text of such an executive order, then the request being refused, and no one will ever turn over the text, and they'll never get around to doing it, and probably for good reason, because it's stupid and unenforceable, but then they might feel pressured into it by or trying to FOIA the text to prove that he was just talking out his ass from the stage. And I think they will, backfill the reality here, and someone will now be scrambling around to put together an unenforceable executive order that they will sign knowing that it would be challenged in court immediately the first time it's even used, or maybe even before it's used, and struck down as stupid. And those will be, I assume, the terms that they actually use. I'm talking about legally speaking. They will simply say, this thing is stupid. That's the word I choose to use for it. Unenforceable. Don't come back to me again. But at that point, it won't matter. It will just be, the only thing of importance will be, you need to prove that the president wasn't lying his ass off from the stage of CPAC. I don't know why that's important to them, but at this point, I think that that's the sort of thing that the president tends to prioritize for himself. It raises interesting possibilities, I guess. And in case you were wondering where the hell it came from, Don Moynihan, a professor at Georgetown, it says here, now hanging out at Oxford, so I guess he must be over there doing what, I don't know, I don't want to say he's on sabbatical or anything. What would be the right terminology? He's a visiting fellow. I don't know. I don't want to put the wrong term on him. Anyway, hanging out in Oxford. That's the term Don uses, Professor Don here, catches us up with, what the hell are you talking about, dummy president? Well, as usual, there's some stupid thing that percolated up through Fox News, which, by the way, is the subject of Jane Mayer's extensive article, that percolated up through Fox News, no doubt, showed up on his tally one morning, and now it's a big deal to Trump and the loons at CPAC. Here's the story, in case you didn't know where he was coming from. Two guys, neither of whom are affiliated with Berkeley, UC Berkeley, got into an altercation on the UC Berkeley campus. Long-ish story, very short. One punched the other and fled. Now, as I understand, it was a conservative activist, and I think a conservative... Does he explain this later on? Yeah. So I'll just read this straight through. That's probably the smartest way of dealing with it at this late stage. One punched the other and fled. Now, Berkeley police tracked down the perpetrator, the puncher, and arrested him. That is the basis for Trump calling for an executive order to govern campus speech. I mean, you could stop right there. Basically, one guy punched another because, allegedly, of his speech, which puncher found offensive, but then did the wrong thing. I mean, depending on what the speech was. Honestly, I'm okay with. I'm still leaving room for Nazi punching. You'll get arrested. I'm just saying you might want to do that. That might be okay. You might be willing to pay that price. Anyway, he objects to the speech. He punches the guy. He flees. The police arrest him. What do we need an executive order for? Guy commits assault. Cops arrest guy. Sounds like everything's working great. Don't need an executive order at all. So what's behind this? Well, Trump ends up bringing the victim of the assault, who was a kid named Hayden Williams, on stage at CPAC and urged him to sue Berkeley. And, of course, the possibility is, well, what if I sue Berkeley and I lose? Well, what if I make sure you can't lose because I issue an executive order saying that you can't lose? Well, how would that work? Well, I'll do it this way. We'll withhold all federal grants from UC Berkeley unless they admit they were wrong and pay you a lot of money. And I guess that's the thinking. So he's now a cause celeb, the kid who's famous for getting punched. And there he is in his blue blazer and tie up on the stage. And I guess, is that him there with Trump in the picture in the Don Moynihan tweet? Trump brought the victim, Hayden Williams, on stage, urged him to sue Berkeley. Williams works for a conservative organization that partners with Turning Point. That's Charlie Kirk's, nominally Charlie Kirk's organization. That is to say, it's the organization that the vast right-wing money machine pays Charlie Kirk, for some reason, to say he runs. Turning Point USA. So some other group that partners with Turning Point USA pays Williams. Williams says a good idea would be for me to go on the campus of UC Berkeley and say thus and such a dumb thing, and then somebody punched me. So, Williams works for a conservative organization that partners with Turning Point. He was allowed on campus, right? So again, the system is totally out of control. PC is out of control on these left-wing campuses. Can I come on your campus and give my right-wing message? I'm a paid troll, essentially, from a right-wing organization. I'm not a student here. Can I just come onto your campus and blurt out dumb right-wing stuff? Yeah, I mean, I wish you wouldn't, but, you know, freedom of speech and all. Okay, and so on he walks. Problem? What do we need the executive order for? They're not respecting free speech, but they are. They let him on there. Yeah, but he got punched. Yeah, well, but did Berkeley punch him? Well, no. He was allowed on campus. Campus police captured the assailant. What has Berkeley done wrong here? Well, you might say, well, a Berkeley student punched him in the face, and somehow they let the student stay there. They didn't kick him out, so that's tolerating it. That's a suppression of free speech. Nah, he's been arrested. He's in trouble, right? Well, as it turns out, by the way, neither the person who got punched in the face nor the person who punched him in the face are students at Berkeley. They're just two people that were allowed on the campus of Berkeley because something that we need an executive order about, I guess. Berkeley campus extends, as Don DeMoynihan reminds us, 1,200 acres and includes 50,000 residents, not including those who are not affiliated with the university, who want to make it a battleground. It has been targeted by both conservative provocateurs and Antifa opposition. It cannot stop every bad interaction. Berkeley spent $4 million last year on security so the likes of Charlie Kirk could share their wisdom. As a reminder, this is a public institution. $4 million is a lot of student scholarships. If the Trump administration wants to facilitate freedom of speech, let them reimburse for those costs. And he includes here a screenshot of what? I don't know, but let's take a look at it. Finally, the absurd allegations regarding UC Berkeley's support for free speech and all of its students, regardless of their perspectives, have no basis in fact. In the last year alone, this university spent more than $4 million to ensure that our conservative students could safely and successfully hold events on campus and invite speakers of their choice to these events. Although we made every effort to inform the media, not a single outlet reported on the incontestable fact that these conservative student groups hosted a large number of conservative speakers, including Charlie Kirk, founder of Turning Point USA, Rick Santorum, Dennis Prager, Heather McDonald, Candace Owens, Dave Rubin, Steve Simpson, Antonia Okafor. Many of these people I have no idea who they are. And Ali Stuckey. Not a single disruption, no opposition, no protest, but also no coverage. Very interesting. You can see, he continues here, it says, you can read more about what happened from the police reports of the event, which are featured here. There's a Berkeley, I guess, the student newspaper, perhaps, here reporting on it. Reporting from some named folks here on Twitter. Scott Jaschik, editor at Inside Higher Education, and of course the Inside Higher Ed Twitter feed itself. And a link to their coverage here. And, we'll continue. Now, if Berkeley officials had urged people to, let's say, for the sake of argument, knock the crap out of him, I'll pay your legal fees, then perhaps they could be deemed liable for encouraging violence, which, of course, obviously, many of you remember, is exactly what Donald Trump said when protest erupted at one of his rallies. Mr. Protect free speech. Instead, they've demonstrated a far higher commitment at Berkeley to ensuring free speech than the president ever has. The First Amendment and a large body of case law provides the strongest free speech protections on public universities that possibly any other place, perhaps he means, in society. This is about imposing political and even military control on what are seen as liberal institutions. For example, he includes a tweet from the execrable Dinesh D'Souza cheering on this executive order. Yes, about time. And if I may make further suggestion, Donald Trump, send in the National Guard if necessary to guarantee free speech at public universities. There should be no compromise in protecting basic constitutional rights. Well, there you go. So that's a rundown of the factual background in all of this. Two people, neither of whom apparently, although I didn't see it in this reporting, but perhaps it was in some of the linked articles, but I'm fairly certain that we've read that, and I guess even if they were both affiliated with the university, it wouldn't make any difference. A speaker was assaulted, even a non-speaker. A person was assaulted. The assailant was arrested. The process is in motion. Everything seems to be working fine. No need whatsoever for any kind of additional action. Everything's working fine, but no. We're going to call out the National Guard now. And Jacob Wohl, who I referenced earlier, doing everything he can to try and perpetuate the same myth that these guys are constantly under attack by having people dress up as security and stand near them. So, whatever. It's more of the same, I suppose. And just wanted you to be aware of that other particular moment of crazy from the CPAC speech. All right, let's see. Other things necessary to address. Why don't we try this, at least for a little while? We could go to the Jared Kushner thing, but I think we covered that fairly extensively last time. What we haven't discussed lately, but that is related to our our charge here at Kagro in the morning, which could be anything, I suppose. We haven't been discussing the internal fight inside the Democratic caucus in the House. Oh no, another one. Yeah. And which one are we talking about? Over an old topic, an old nemesis, the motion to recommit is back again, rearing its ugly head, I guess we could say. Now that there's a Democratic majority in the House again, motions to recommit are an issue again. We haven't heard about them in a long time, except every once in a while when we would urge Democrats in the minority to offer a particularly well-crafted motion to recommit, only to see it be defeated on party line vote by the Republicans, who have the party discipline to withstand these moments. And if it's new to you as an issue, happy birthday. Good to have you around. I hope you're enjoying things and learning lots. If they're not new to you because you're an old timer but need a refresher, we can take a look. The controversy found new life in a Politico piece from the 28th of February, right at the end of last month, right at the end of last week, I guess, in Politico. This piece titled, "This is not a day at the beach." That's the quote from Nancy Pelosi. "This is not a day at the beach. Pelosi tells moderate Dems to stop voting with GOP." And that sounds like a good idea to most of you listening, I am sure. Here's what the division is about. Heather Cagle and John Bresnahan reporting this piece. House Democrats held an emotional debate behind closed doors Thursday over how to stop losing embarrassing procedural battles with Republicans, a clash that exposed the divide between moderates and progressives. Speaker Nancy Pelosi took a hard line at the caucus meeting, saying that being a member of Congress sometimes requires taking tough votes. "This is not a day at the beach. In case you thought it was, it's not. This is the Congress of the United States," Pelosi said, according to two sources. Pelosi also said vulnerable Democrats who had the courage to vote against the Republican motions to recommit would become a higher priority for the party leadership and the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. That's, in other words, worth re-election money to pay attention to the instructions. I don't know whether this article goes on to explain exactly what the motions to recommit are actually about, but let me read through some of this first, and then we'll backfill if necessary, because this is where it turns interesting for relative, let's say, for relative newcomers, perhaps, or other old-timers who are somehow otherwise fans of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, which is entirely possible and entirely justifiable. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the superstar New York freshman lawmaker, very nice, suggested she would alert progressive activists when Democrats are voting with the GOP on these motions, said the sources, which is not a bad idea. It made some people angry, but that would be a very Daily Kos sort of response to the thing. So how can we get upset about that? In the end, Pelosi and other top Democrats didn't agree to any rules change and will continue to study the issue. The motion to recommit, here you are, offers the House minority one last shot at changing legislation before it receives a final floor vote. Typically, the motion is used to try to squeeze the majority party, but it rarely succeeds. That is to say, it never succeeds when Republicans are in the majority and Democrats craft carefully worded motions to recommit that are admittedly designed to make members of the majority feel guilty and conflicted about casting their vote for the legislation as currently written, because it's usually what you're doing when you really get a good gotcha one is you find an issue that the majority professes to care very deeply about and say, oh yeah, what about this? In this particular kind of instance that your bill doesn't address, wouldn't your bill be stronger if it did address that? And hopefully if you find the right thing, you make the Republicans say, oh yeah, this is really embarrassingly hypocritical to pass a bill prohibiting XYZ when, our favorites over at whatever conservative industry do this all the time. We should disallow it for them too. Except Republicans always say, yeah, I get the point, but, and then they vote against it. Now, it typically works with Democratic majorities, and we've had this debate before. In other words, this has been a problem for Democrats before. Like when? Oh, I don't know. Let's say the last time Democrats had a majority in the House. So in like 2010 or so, when, or I guess that would be the end of things, but I don't even remember now when the ending dates of House majorities have been. The last time, and the time before that, and I'll tell you what, the time before that too, when Democrats hold the majority, Republicans do the same thing. It's the same operation. Craft something that Democrats either say they care about or that if they were to say they don't like this motion to recommit would be an embarrassing thing. What happened in this particular instance was we have the gun background check bill was being offered. And, it was debated, it was amended a couple of times, and now it's set for final passage. We're going to expand background checks to everything. No more gun sales anywhere, under any circumstances, without a background check. Now, before final passage, there exists this last chance. It's written into the House rules. The motion to recommit is available. Now, the motion to recommit, technically speaking, originally, what you would do with it is, it's just what it sounds like. You're going to make a motion to recommit the bill to committee, send it back to the committee it came from, and say, I want you to amend it in this way. And there developed 3 different kinds of motions to recommit, and it depended on the wording that you used. And there eventually was a rules change eliminating the most annoying kind of motion to recommit, and I can't even remember the old language, but essentially it was a direction to send it back to committee with instructions to report back to the House a bill with the following amendment. And that just the plain language of, report it back without any specific instructions about when or how quickly was usually taken to mean that's the death of the bill. A motion to recommit actually killed the bill because it sent it back to committee, and floor time being at such a premium in both the House and the Senate, but usually we refer to that Senate when we're talking about the premium of the floor time. But the same thing exists in the House. You want to get more things on the floor. And the general thought was that a bill that spent a considerable amount of time on the floor, or whatever amount of time whatever it was allotted, if it had its shot and ended up getting recommitted, the schedule was just piled too high to be able to afford to bring the thing back for another fight, especially if the Republicans could just recommit the thing all over again with another stupid trick. So there developed later on a different kind of motion to recommit with instructions for the committee to report forthwith, I think was the name, was the language that was being used, that was interpreted by the chair as meaning that, okay, the referral back to committee is only technical. In other words, we're going to amend this bill immediately to read this way, just as if we had amended it during the regular standard amendments process, and keep the bill on the floor and then have a final vote on its passage, which was a much more reasonable way of handling things, I think. Except, what it ends up doing is it gives the minority the chance to amend the bill without going through all of the vetting process that Democrats have to go through in order to amend the bill. In order to get an amendment considered on the floor of the House under most circumstances, where each bill comes to the floor with a specific rule governing its debate, you have to, one, usually these are amendments that have been proposed and were debated very often in committee and either rejected for some reason or simply saying, well, we would like the judgment of the House on this one as a whole, rather than putting it in the chairman's mark, the marked up bill that's brought to the floor as the base bill. Or at the very least, your amendments, you have to take them to the Rules Committee when the Rules Committee is debating on how will we set the parameters for debate of this bill on the House floor. You propose your amendments, and if it's accepted as a good idea and the leadership thinks it's a good idea, then the Rules Committee includes it in the rule. We're going to have the following amendments. The following amendments have made their case, have justified their efficacy and appropriateness to the Rules Committee, and we think that the House as a whole should have a crack at this amendment. And that's the way a Democrat, or really, supposed to be Republicans, under the normal circumstances, under normal order, regular order, as we like to say, that's the way you get your amendment considered. An amendment that's considered on the House floor in front of everybody on C-SPAN has been vetted at a minimum by the Rules Committee, the leadership of which gets input from the House leadership and the committee leadership, and you get some sort of consensus. This is a worthy thing. Or, I hate this thing, but it's a legitimate question. I think it'll lose, but go ahead, give them a vote. If it's a Republican one, perhaps. Sometimes they feel the same way about a Democrat offering an amendment. But it's a real ordeal. And to make it through to floor consideration that way is quite an accomplishment. What the motion to recommit offers, and there was a lot of pushback on this because the gun bill that we discussed was the background check bill. The motion to recommit offered by the Republicans, it's important to know this, was to say, all right, well, how about this? If you're going to have universal background checks, if it's discovered during this background check that the person attempting to buy a gun is in the country illegally, well, then that information should be sent off to ICE, and they should be able to deal with the person appropriately. Except for the problem being ICE never deals with anybody appropriately, for the most part anyway. And you don't want to, there's a lot of Democrats who are uninterested, let's say, in doing anything to offer more fuel, more power to ICE, especially in a bill that they thought they were going to be able to deliver at home to a constituency very happy to receive it. Universal background checks, everybody wanted it. But does it have to come at the price of empowering ICE, which some people said when they campaigned, I am campaigning to abolish. So it offers a very tough vote. Well, who cares, right? Tough things happen in Congress all the time. Yes, but remember what I told you, the motion to recommit short circuits here. In other words, as a surprise, without any vetting at all, without any discussion prior to what goes on, the Republicans can show up and have 10 minutes of debate, 5 minutes for themselves, 5 minutes for Democrats, on a amendment that gets a clean shot, no matter what, at the bill on the floor, regardless of what the Rules Committee has to say about it, regardless of what the Committee of Jurisdiction over the bill has to say about it. You got It shows up. It doesn't have to be printed ahead of time. You got 5 minutes to debate it. And it's in other words, giving the minority a privileged shot at a secret amendment that nobody has the chance to evaluate on its substance or the impact or anything like it. Whereas Democrats in the majority have to jump through 1,000 hoops to get even the smallest amendment considered. It is a very rare privilege indeed, and it's afforded to the minority party every single time, with the understanding that it is in the power of the majority to simply say, well, you know what? It doesn't matter. Even if it's a great idea, it hasn't been vetted. We haven't studied it. Remember, these are the same Republicans who say they need more time to study the 70 words that it takes to disapprove of Trump's emergency declaration for the southern border. Well, I don't know. I haven't had a chance to review it yet. Well, here it is. It says, I don't think he should be able to do that. Period. The end. You don't really need to review anything. These things show up. Who knows how long they are? Who knows what's in them? Nobody knows. And remember that they're almost all designed to be gotchas. So what do you do with them? Well, as it turns out, it causes considerable pain inside the Democratic caucus, where members like to say, well, we're free to vote our conscience. And in fact, there are people in the leadership who say you must be free to vote your conscience because we have to preserve these Democratic districts at all costs. Sometimes a legitimate argument, sometimes not. But as Pelosi reminds us, actually, you'll be better off, it's her theory, I think, you'd be better off running as on the platform of a successful Democratic majority and being a part of that, even if you didn't get everything you always wanted, than you would be in the other cases. And it's a competing theory. We'll come back to it. We'll discuss it some more. It's going to be an issue. It has been an issue for decades. It'll never go away. We'll be back.
From Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Lots to come, of course, on Justice Putnam's program next, the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Oh, I can see one thing I like. Matt Gaetz is rated the most punchable face in Congress right after Ted Cruz. Is that an actual news item, or did you just make that up, Justice? Either way, it's going to be pretty interesting. That is only a part of what you'll get when you stay tuned for Justice Putnam next.